Hello, my name is Kelly Mooney. This is my advanced research project for special education. The purpose of this project was to look at an urban at-risk high school student who is participating in a special education program at a blended learning academy in order to address the issue of adequate academic progress towards graduation. Data would be collected through tracking of online participation as well as tracking of offline participation, and the data collected would aim to make a connection between behavior and performance in academia through behavioral motivators and progress monitoring. This would ultimately be used to design a monitoring program that could be tailored to each individual student based on motivational support, encouragement, guidance towards achieving academic success, and overcoming any predispositions that the student may have to making success. The research question is, what would the response to intervention on academic progress towards graduation of an urban high school student identified as at risk if given a three-tier scaffold of advisory through academic motivation, academic goal setting, and student and advisor progress monitoring. Special considerations include at risk. Key terms of at risk: dropout recovery and blended learning academy, which address the type of educational program the student was enrolled in. An assumption can be made that since the student was enrolled in this academic program, that the student was also an at-risk urban special education student. The review of literature addressed check-in and check-out systems in which expectations are set. Progress monitoring occurs, and then addressing of the results of the progress monitoring and tailoring goals and interventions to the students used, as well as self-monitoring, in which an individual sets goals and monitors their own progress towards long and short-term goals, and can graph the progress and independently keep record of the data, and then meet with an advisor or teacher in order to address progress, successes, consequences, or any modifications to goals. Social supports in the classroom was another research or literature review in which Slowinski, Demray, and Lazarus address the importance of social supports not only through peers, but also social supports through teachers, in which a student needs to feel that they have one or more important individuals in their social network who can help them through their academic achievements as well as social emotional competence, and celebrate their successes and address any needs of the student. And finally, Utley and Oberker addressed a multi-tiered system of support in which the student uses evidence-based practices as well as positive behavior supports to address social, emotional, and academic goals and progress. Multi-tiered system of supports can also be used to address students who have more intense behavior problems and target interventions necessary to use to rectify those problems. The procedures used were a research design of ABA, in which baseline data was collected over 1 week with no intervention. Intervention data was collected over 3 weeks with intervention, and a new baseline was collected after intervention over 1 week. The student is a 17-year-old male with an age grade of 11th grade, but a credit grade of the 9th grade, who is identified as having an emotional disturbance. The student was previously aggressive and outwardly physically and verbally explosive. However, the student has worked on behavior goals and now is exhibiting behaviors that are the extreme opposite, including introverted and non-social behavior, reduction in outwardly combative behavior, and passive noncompliance. The student's learning characteristics are that he's an individual learner and does not prefer group instruction, prefers technology learning through the use of our online curriculum, and likes to be in control of his learning as well as learning environments. Other interests include video games, YouTube, construction, observing others, and interacting with a small group of peers at school. The student was selected for this study because the student is in good attendance standing. However, the student rarely completes any lessons and is not even meeting the minimum requirements for progression towards graduation. Although the student has worked hard on behavioral goals, the student has halted progress towards academic goals. Baseline intervention was collected over 1 week, 4 times a day during a 4-hour session, twice before the daily break and twice after. The probes that were used were a baseline collection chart and goal setting and daily collection charts. The desired outcome is that the student would increase daily work completion and approach the school-wide completion requirements and progress towards graduation. This will be determined by taking the student's baseline daily amounts of lessons and comparing them to the amount of lessons completed during intervention and after intervention. Measurements include observations 4 times in a 4-hour session for 10 minutes, 2 before the daily break and 2 after the daily break. This would also be followed up with a collection of daily lessons completed for the day, both in the eCourse system and in the live class taught classes or paperwork. The classroom that the student was participating in was the main lab, which can hold a maximum of 40 students and has a maximum of 40 teachers, or 4 teachers. The observer was one of the 4 teachers. All expectations and routines were put in place at least 6 weeks prior to maintain consistency throughout the project. 3 data collection charts were used: baseline chart, a goal setting chart, and a daily collection chart. Here you can see a sample of the baseline chart as well as points accrued for each different type of work the student could complete throughout the day, as well as a sample goal setting chart in which the student used to track the academic progress towards the goals that were set for the day and the week. Intervention activities that were used were daily meetings to discuss progress, random motivators, positive reinforcement, which occurred intermittently short-term and long-term, goal setting, and self-monitoring. The results were collected using a baseline data chart, data collected from intervention weeks 1 through 3, the student's self-monitoring goal chart, and the new baseline data. Here you can see a sample of the student's goal setting chart in which he was able to track his own progress each day and for each week. This graph shows a compilation of the data from the student's weekly lessons completed. As you can see, the baseline started at 0 and gradually increased through interventions weeks 1, 2, and 3, with a new baseline that is still above the original baseline. During intervention weeks 1, the student resulted in completion of 9 lessons. In intervention weeks 2, he resulted in the completion of 15 lessons. And in intervention week 3, he completed 31 lessons. In addition to the data collected, the researcher discovered that the student was able to be responsible for tracking the number of lessons completed each day independently, as his daily goal charts reflected the same amount of lessons as did the observers. The weekly goal was not met for any week. However, the daily goal was met for 1 day in week 1. This data showed that each week's growth over the previous week increased by at least 67%. Pre-intervention data showed that the student was coming to school daily. However, he was not completing the required lessons. The intervention data showed that when the interventions were applied, the student began to improve daily progress in the eCourse curriculum, but was unable to meet all daily or weekly goals. And the post-intervention data showed that while the student did not achieve the daily goals of 20 lessons per day, he was able to complete a minimum of 2 lessons every day. This minimum is an increase over the original baseline of 0 lessons per day. While the student did not achieve a weekly goal of 100 lessons per week, he was able to complete 18 lessons consistently for the week, with lessons completed every day. This minimum is also an increase over the original baseline, which resulted in 0 lessons. Final results are that the student was able to complete during week 1 an average of 1.8 lessons per day, in week 2 an average of 3 lessons, and in week 3 an average of 6.2 lessons. This is almost double increase from week to week. The overall results reflect that in a 5-week period, the student would have been able to achieve the weekly goal on week 5, and that the data reflects that an increase for the daily week goals was too fast and that the student was consistently unable to meet them. In continuing this intervention, the goal should be adjusted to meet the student's current abilities. Questions for further research involve the length of the study, in which would the student have achieved the goal set out if the study were to be continued longer, and the validity of the study concerning the results if the teacher involved was not the intervention specialist or a preferred teacher. That's my references used for Haraway, Sawalski, and Utley. Thank you, and that concludes my presentation.